Hey everyone, it's Ellis, and this is going to be the patch 11.4 notes rundown. I don't really know what to expect given that the last patch was absolutely massive, but I do know that apparently some things are getting hit, and we'll probably talk about the jungle changes this patch. First up is going to be Amumu, base health increased, E base attack damage decreased later. So this is pretty interesting. I mean, he's randomly getting 2 HP, I mean, that doesn't really do anything, and then E tantrum, wait, what actually is this? Why does this exist? Why does this exist? I guess this is like bloopers, I don't know. Okay, so Amumu's actually getting buffed. Now, this is interesting because Amumu got hit a little while ago, but then Mumu's been hit indirectly in other several ways, so this is kind of strange. E-Tantrum, he's getting his damage back that he ended up having taken away from him several patches ago. Doesn't really matter. Amumu actually is still viable. He's just very bland, generic, and people don't like playing him. That's really all that it is. He is still good, and he does still have some synergy with items that are better than some other tank junglers. The good thing about Amumu is that Amumu is mostly based around his base kit and his base levels, right? He doesn't actually have a super big dependency on items. So if the jungle changes do go through, then Amumu will end up being a lot better. Braum, R cooldown decreased. The Pal of the Poros is getting more chances to activate his high agency, high impact ultimate to help turn the tides of the team fight. Yeah, it doesn't really matter. Champion's not really viable. There's a lot of problems in the meta right now, and if enchanters do start eventually coming back, Braum's not really gonna be able to show himself. Doesn't really make any sense that CDR off his ultimate would somehow make him more meaningful or able to come back in pro play in its current iteration. Caitlyn, base damage growth and attack speed growth increased. This is really frightening because I think that Caitlyn is already competitively viable, but people have forgotten about her, and when Riot keeps giving her these micro buffs, it is going to put her on the radar of a lot of players right now. There have been items that have gotten buffed that Caitlyn obviously does like. She likes the new version of the Phantom Dancer, whereas the old version of the Phantom Dancer wasn't as beneficial to Caitlyn, and so Caitlyn's going to start returning to the position that she was at before. Camille, W cooldown increased, W tactical sweep, 15 to 9 seconds, 17 to 11 seconds. So this doesn't really do anything. So I've talked about this before in previous patch rundowns, that if Riot doesn't actually address the thing that makes the champion really powerful, then the champion will continue to exist. The things that make Camille obviously really powerful is everything else is really weak right now, but her hookshot and her R are both really strong tools. The W tactical sweep is not really oppressive. It doesn't really do anything. It's not going to alter Camille's laning phase because she's not always casting tactical sweep necessarily off cooldown. Having a little bit more of a window against it doesn't really matter. And then also 2 seconds is not going to be meaningful enough to do anything for mid-game team fights. So again, it's just one of those things that it's just Riot really missing the ball here. Fiora, passive mark damage increased. Now this is interesting if tanks do end up coming back because Fiora is obviously probably the most notorious tank killer. Mark damage 2.5% plus 4.5% per 100 AD to 3% plus 5.5% per 100 AD. This is actually massive for Fiora, so this is going to be something that we're going to have to keep on our mind for maybe future patches. Jinx, base health increased. So they're undoing the nerf to her base stats in the previous patch that they took it away from her. Now, this is obviously interesting because it just means that Jinx is just outright buffed pretty much all across the board. She's a hyper carry. She's one of the last remaining ones still in the game, and I think that that's really cool. Jinx is probably just a champion that should be getting picked a lot more. Kai'Sa, Q base damage per missile, maximum single target damage, and maximum evolved single target damage decreased. Okay, so they're hitting all of Kai'Sa's damage on her Q. The thing about Kai'Sa that's really interesting is that she has a lot of prevalence in pro play right now, and a lot of people will say that she's really strong. She's really strong, obviously, when she gets a lot of kills and she gets accelerated to a point that she's not normally supposed to be at. When that ends up happening, then yes, she feels oppressive due to the nature of her kit. But the reality is that in a standard game or a slow game or something where she's not getting fed unnatural amounts of kills and whatnot, Kai'Sa's actually not as strong as some other marksmen that are just in the game right now. So it's a very strange thing. I understand that she's very popular in solo queue, and she's basically the new version of Vayne in that she's hyper popular, everyone likes to play her, and she feels really fun. The reality is that a nerf like this, I mean, I don't think it's going to stop people from playing her, and it just, I don't know. Again, it just feels like it misses the same way that Camille's does. Katarina, on-hit damage now scales. Damage per knife increase. So Katarina is, I think, pretty interesting in that she's one of the few champions that can actually just keep stacking legendary items and doesn't have to opt into a mythic. And Katarina's build path is going to be dependent on the game as well as the enemy team composition. And in a lot of situations, Katarina is actually somewhat viable, but yes, the hit to Kraken Slayer a couple of patches ago definitely did knock her down a little bit of a peg, and then also the nerf to Lichbane also ended up hurting her a little bit, as well as the prevalence, or the rise, I assume, of the magic resist item Verdant Barrier that should actually be popping up a lot in coming weeks. Urgot, W damage on hit effectiveness increased, so W purge on hit damage ratio 50 to 75%. This is going to actually just buff all of his non-Kraken Slayer builds. Urgot, I think, is actually viable right now with Shield Bow as his primary build. Sometimes he can go Gale Force, and then obviously Kraken still exists as well, but I don't know. Aside from all of that, I mean, this is just going to end up being an overall buff to Urgot, and it's one that everyone should really like. Lee Sin, Q cooldown decrease, Sonic Wave, 11 to 7 seconds to 10 to 6 seconds. This is obviously a nice little buff for Lee Sin, since Q typically is the spell that you're instantly casting off cooldown in pretty much all situations. Is it going to magically make Lee Sin come back into the meta? Absolutely not, especially not if the jungle changes that have been rumored are actually going to be inside of this patch. Renekton, Q non-champion base healing decrease later, enhanced non-champion base healing decrease later, Q call to Meek, non-champion healing, 3 to 9 to 3 to 7, and then enhanced non-champion base healing, 9 to 27 to 9 to 21. Obviously, I'm not a super big fan of nerfs to Renekton in general. I think a lot of people probably know my stance on Renekton in general. In solo queue, he is a good champion. In competitive, he has a lot of popularity. There's a lot of people that think he's a very good champion. There's also people with my line of thought that think that he's not a very good champion and that he's allowed to excel or he gets wins, mostly because of people's mistakes and whatnot, and all that good jazz. Anyways, this is just objectively going to make him a weaker champion all around, in addition to the nerfs that he's received indirectly in previous patches to items. Samira. So it looks like she has a laundry list of nerfs coming up, and honestly, I don't know what to think about this. As it stands, our Desert Rose has consistently been warming the ban bench, even when technically closed to balance. We believe that she has several frustrating attributes that contribute to her high ban rate. We're tackling this problem by giving her some balance tweaks so that both Samira players and her opponents feel more comfortable having her back in the ring. Passive, Daredevil Impulse. Bonus damage ratio 7.5% AD to 3.5 to 10.5% AD, levels 1 to 18, so obviously she has more scaling now, but obviously a little bit less effectiveness early on. Q-Flare, 100% AD to 80 to 110% AD, so again, more scaling in her kit in the later stages. W, Blade Whirl, 1 second to 0.75 seconds. This is obviously going to make the timing a little bit more crisp, and so this is a very nice change that'll obviously not really be super noticeable at elite and pro level play, but definitely can be felt in the lower MMRs. E, Wild Rush, ally targeting removed, and now new Eye on the Tower. Samira can now dash through enemy towers, but will target champions over towers. Dash speed is lowered by quite a lot, and then Inferno trigger. Cooldown 3 seconds to 8 seconds is going to impact her inside of the team fight. So, regardless though, this isn't super mega impactful. I mean, her mid game and her late game is, I imagine, just still going to be relatively fine all across the board. Samira is still going to be picked. I think that the nerfs that everyone was crying about, I think it's pretty much over exaggerated here. I think that this is more than fine. Skarner, base health and health growth decrease. So his health is actually going down, health growth also going down by 5 a level. So some people might be wondering, why is this? Well, Skarner is one of the champions that, like Amumu, is mostly only balanced around his base stats and then also a lack of dependency on items pretty much after the first one. And with the meta shifting into more utility and tanks and whatnot, Skarner's actually probably going to come in really strong very soon, if not already being one of the best junglers in the game. And so it is very understandable that Riot is maybe identifying this early and nerfing him now. Okay, this makes no sense whatsoever, and I understand her solo queue win rate, okay? Solo queue is not always indicative of how strong a champion is. You can list and cite many champions and different builds and whatnot that it is always going to be the case for, right? Obviously, Akali, Aphelios, lots of different champions that have been very, very, very strong in elite level player hands, and now Soraka, Q movement speed increase, W heal increase, Q star call, 15 to 25% bonus movement speed to 20 to 30% bonus movement speed. Now again, this is the thing that you max first. So it is pretty nice just getting a flat 5% at pretty much all of the base levels. That is a lot of value. That's almost boots tier 1, just being handed to her on the star call. Astral Infusion, heal, base, 90 to 230 to 100 to 240. So she's getting more. Now remember, Soraka gets multiple items that increase her healing effectiveness. So this is really, really weird because she just keeps getting buffed. And Soraka, much like Seraphine, is in theory a 4-way flex. So it's very interesting. Mid and top, she's a counter pick. Down in bottom lane as the marksman position or the support, she is just able to basically slot in there pretty generically. Soraka is definitely a really, really, really strong champion, but I think a lot of people suffer from a similar thing that they might have with other champions like Malzahar, where they feel like they have no self-respect if they play this champion or something, and it's just really strange because she's so good. Talon, W cooldown now scales, bonus damage ratio increase. W rake, 9 seconds to 9 to 7 seconds, bonus damage ratio 40% AD to 55% AD. This This is definitely a nice buff for Talon. Talon's one of those champions that you have to be really careful with, though, because much like Qiyana and some other assassins, they're really balanced around solo queue, because solo queue players lack the cohesion and coordination to understand both how to lane against the champion, as well as play around the champion's roams. As a byproduct of that, Riot normally has a very hard time balancing champions like this. Tryndamere, base damage increase. So Tryndamere is just getting a random 3 AD thrown into him. I don't think that this is just a random 3 AD, considering how many autos he does definitely weave in a lot of fights, as well as even early on. So while it is very micro, I think that it is something that pushes him in the right direction, and I do already think that Tryndamere is viable in some lane matchups and some team compositions, even at a competitive tier. Varus, W empowered bonus damage on Q channel time increased. W blighted quiver. Increases by 0 to 50% based on channel time, increases by 0 to 80% based on channel time. Max health missing damage, 9 to 21%, levels 1 to 13, 10.8 to 25.2% levels 1 to 13. So Varus is just getting a lot more damage added into his W. This is going to ultimately maybe start pushing for a lethality Varus to come back, because again, when a lot of other champions are getting nerfed, things that might have made a champion's nerf more impactful at that point in time ends up becoming less relevant or less meaningful, and suddenly champions that haven't been in the meta for a while can eventually start pushing their way back. Varus has gotten a lot of indirect buffs as well as some direct buffs in a lot of recent patches, and so this is a very good situation for Varus. Lethality Varus might just be on the rise again. Veigar, Q cost decreased and R cooldown decreased later. So in addition to the Everfrost change, Veigar is also a champion that's getting some indirect buffs and now direct buffs. Baleful Strike mana cost going down by 10 per rank is actually quite big, because this is a spammable ability inside of lane. This really helps with his mana issues. R Primordial Burst going down in the mid game and late game is actually quite impactful, because Veigar does get a lot of CDR in those fights. This allows him to be a lot more liberal and free with the usage of his ultimate, and actually consider casting it even just for pressure damage leading up to fights or objectives. Now we move into items. Guinsoo's Rageblade, attack speed 40% to 45%. Guinsoo's is a really underappreciated item right now. Getting a little bit of extra stats is never something that I'm really going to complain about. Moonstone Renewer. If you've been abusing the Moonstaff combo, well, it looks like Riot is going to try to hit it a little bit. They already hit Staff of Flowing Water in the last patch, but this one's actually not that big. So 70 to 100 based on allies level to 50 to 100 based on allies level. By the time that you end up getting Moonstone and then Staff of Flowing Water and whatnot, generally the level isn't going to be as painful. You are going to be missing a bit on the healing, but eventually it's going to start to balance out, and the healing is actually not going to be that different when you start entering into mid-game team fights and whatnot. And then obviously Moonstone Renewer and the heals in the later stages of the game, again, you're not going to be feeling it that much. This is a really, really nice balance change. I was actually half expecting Riot to just completely gut the item, and I'm very surprised and also relieved that they didn't end up doing it. We move into the Grievous Wounds items, and now I really do think that it's pretty hard for any item now to really contend with Chemtech Putrefier. Morellonomicon, it can get an extra 10 ability power, but realistically, mages aren't going to be building Morellonomicon, especially not if enchanters are in the game. Enchanters are always just going to be building Chemtech Putrefier, because it's just way better of an item. Mortal Reminder, attack damage 20 to 25. That is really nice. This is definitely another buff to Yasuo and Yone. For other marksman champions, it's not really that big, but, you know, you can take what you can get. Chempunk Chainsword, getting an extra 100 HP. It is nice, because bruisers are kind of in a really weird situation, but sort of whatever. Mage items. So, Cosmic Drive, remove Spellblade, Dance, movement speed. Cosmic Drive can no longer grant bonus movement speed when dealing ability damage. That's fine. Put into Cosmic Drive. If you have at least 160 ability power, so generally if you have your mythic item and then you complete Cosmic Drive, you're going to be fine. Gain 20 ability haste and 10 to 30 movement speed based on level. So, this is a lot better because it's static and you don't have to rely on just constantly proccing abilities. What this means is that dot champions who previously benefited a lot from before aren't going to be the only focus. Other champions that just like the movement speed are definitely going to like it now. In addition to that, you also get 10 more ability haste by activating the passive. So overall, this is just a nice buff to Cosmic Drive. I still think, though, that it's still going to slot into the same exact item curve, where you're generally going to be getting it 4th item or 5th item on most champions that you would want it as, just to add some novelty to pretty much your late game. I can't really think of a situation where any champion would want to get the 2nd or 3rd, especially not with Banshee's Veil, probably just becoming the 2nd and 3rd item on most mages. Everfrost. So this is a huge change change, and it might just end up becoming the best mythic for mages overall. So the build is now changed from Lost Chapter Blasting Wand and 1250 gold to Lost Chapter Blasting Wand and Kindle Gem plus 450 gold. The health is also going to go up by 50. That's really big. Glaciate damage, 100 plus 30% AP to 125 plus 25% AP. So basically, utility champions that are utilizing Everfrost are going to like this a lot more, because they don't necessarily just build AP. So obviously, you know, one of the options that you immediately think of could just be Cho'Gath, who builds Everfrost and just goes into pure tank. Glaciate cast time 0.25 seconds to 0.15 seconds. This makes it a lot smoother, and it lets you combo a lot better as well. So Everfrost has just been getting a lot of really nice buffs, and this is only going to make it better. Eternal Winter Ornn upgrade. So health 300 to 350, and glaciate damage. I like how the image is missing. That's definitely good. But anyways, yeah, pretty much still the same. Doesn't really matter all that much. Okay, jungle camp changes. So this is what everyone's been asking me to talk about lately, and we're finally going to get into it. So Riot has decided that they're not only going to hit the EXP of the junglers, they're also going to hit their gold. So Gromp is losing quite a bit of EXP. It used to be 182.25 to 168.75 in the later stages, but early on, it's even losing 10. Large Krug, 37 to 49.95 to 27 to 36.45 is another big one. And then gold also down by 10. Gold on Gromp is down by 20. I mean, that's really big. Small Krug, 18 to 24.3 to 16 to 21.6. So this one's not as big in terms of the experience, but it is still going to be noticeable. And then Crimson Raptor, so 45 to 60.75 to 35 to 47.25, and then the gold is down 45 to 35. So these are definitely noticeable nerfs. I really hate when Riot does multiple things at once rather than just hitting one or the other and then trying to assess or evaluate and then going from there. What these changes ultimately mean is that champions whose base kit and base levels are really powerful, notably tanks or utility junglers are going to fall into that department, or champions that have very low gold cost items are going to become increasingly better. The only power farming junglers that are going to be really good at this are the ones that clear super omega fast. So Udyr is still going to be valuable because he breaks a lot of rules that should exist for a champion with his theme. Karthus is still probably also going to be one of the super fast clearing junglers that is also still going to be viable with something like this. Lilia is going to be pushed more into the Moonstone Renewer, or Moonstaff build rather than going for Night Troller or anything like that. And then obviously, junglers like Skarner become really good, junglers like Zac become really good, junglers like Amumu end up going up inside of value. Just basically tank and utility junglers become a lot stronger at that point in time. Champions that are really powerful with just one core item because of their base kit, again, being really good. This is akin to support champions that used to be picked not because they needed any items, but because their natural kit was so strong. And that's where this jungle camp change is going to end up shifting it. Champions like Graves are going to be really hurt by this. Champions that rely on both items and the ability to get ahead of their opponent are going to be really hit by this. What this might mean is that we start actually seeing champions like Shen or Cho'Gath, Sejuani, Ivern, Skarner, and whatnot start coming back into the jungle more and more frequently. Anyway, TLDR, at the end of the day, jungle will change dramatically, but no, I'm just kidding. Jungle is actually kind of ruined because it's going to change super dramatically now. Clash build a team. As I always say, patreon.com/LSXYZ9. Now, solo queue and Clash tier lists in addition to VOD reviews, all at the same tier pretty much. So expect to see those drop basically day one as soon as this patch notes come out. Anyway, slight recap, not a whole lot changed inside of this patch. Obviously, hypers are going to be starting to get a lot better, and utility tank junglers are going to be on the move. There's only been basically hit to current prevalent meta things, but those meta things are going to be shifting anyway in coming patches. So this patch doesn't really do a whole lot except for massively change the dynamic of jungle. Anyways, even though there is no skins, we'll have to see what ends up happening in LCS, LEC, LCK, and whatnot, LPL as well in the next coming weeks to see where the meta is going to be shifting, because generally, Riot patches trail about 2 patches behind competitive, and so that should mean that we should expect notable changes somewhere around 11.5, 11.6. Thanks everyone for watching, and I will see you again in 2 weeks, and don't forget to also check out the Cheater Recall video, which is going to be coming out on the T1 Fighting channel sometime later this week or at the very early start of next week. That's going to be a video that I'm looking forward to making.